On the night I knew I loved him, the sea was quiet like the stars. The night smelled like him, the musky scent of his aftershave, the scent of chamomile tea on his breath, the way his hair always smelled a little bit salty and a little bit smoky. Before he took my old silk cloth from my hands and put it into my pocket, he said, "Sometimes the old things are the best things." But he always made the old things around me seem new. I didn't tell him those things were actually the best things. I didn't say anything, actually. The breeze tickling my face was my only proof that time hadn't completely stopped. But the way he looked at me right then, the way it made me feel, it was fucking profound. Like he believed I was more exquisite than the luxurious silk and cashmere and linen he was accustomed to. And his eyes never lied, so I believed him. He had a way of doing that, making people believe him, sometimes in themselves. I glanced down at the silk cloth in my pocket. I ran my rough, calloused fingers over the delicate fabric. I always liked doing that, one of the only happy things from my childhood. It kept me grounded, reminded me of where I came from. But at that moment I realized it wasn't the silk that I longed to touch. As he smiled back at me in that way he always does, I knew I wanted to touch him. I wanted it so badly that it physically ached. Not in the way a stab wound aches. I'd have known. I've been stabbed dozens of times. No. This was a completely different type of ache. Yearning. Craving. I'm Blackbeard. When I want something, I get it. People fall over themselves to make sure of that, but I'd never wanted something like this before. I'd never wanted something like him. I didn't have a plan of what to do. Not a fucking thing. I wouldn't have known where to start. The way I wanted to know the texture of his hair, wanted to know how it would feel between my fingers as they combed through it. Wanted to feel the now unfamiliar texture of his bare face. I couldn't think of anything else. I wanted him to embrace me the way the ocean and the sky embraced us. I think that's when I knew when I loved him. Ed? He always said my name like it was something he adored. Yeah? He went quiet all of a sudden. Oh yeah, mate, it's all good. I'm good. That wasn't the word to describe how I was, actually, but the right words were tangled on my tongue. Just thinking. He waited patiently for me to speak. It reminded me of how safe I was with him. The shadows covered his face, so I took a step closer to see it better. Then I took one more step to satisfy my other senses. Actually, I spoke with hesitation. I knew I needed to choose my words carefully. I want to ask you something. Of course. He tilted his head and gave me a smile of encouragement. You know you can ask me anything. Yeah, I know. I was just wondering about, you know, you being a gentleman and all. How would you... Wait, he interrupts. You're a gentleman too. Always have been. I didn't teach you how to be one. I really only shared methods of dealing with the terrible people I've got to put up with, just in case. Just in case? Just in case what? Well, just in case you and I were to be... I listened and watched as a sudden sense of awareness seemed to set in. If you and I were to continue travelling together, you never know how we may come across. Right. My heart had jumped into my throat, and my need to touch him grew stronger by the second. In any case, he said, I didn't mean to get off track. Apologies. Continue. It's fine. I cleared my throat. It felt dry and chalky. Let's just say there's this person. A person who is not me. And this person who is not me likes another person. You don't know this person. I don't know him either. You're asking about two people, one of which is not you, and the other of which neither of us know. Yep, sounds like it. The corners of his lips turned up the tiniest bit. Do they have names, at least? I scoffed. Names? Yes, that's probably something they have. Their names are Stuart and Ted. And Ted likes Stuart? Yes, it's not Stuart, just Stuart. He likes him very much, yeah, and he wants to show it, but he doesn't know how. He's not so good at talking about these things. I understand, he said. Words can be powerful, can't they? Yet it's not always possible for them to convey exactly what we feel. He had this look of wisdom he sometimes wore when he was waxing poetic. I'd previously decided it was 15% pretentious and 85% delightful. This time, however, it was maximum delightful. Makes sense, he went on. Feelings are ancient. Words are relatively new. Well then, what would you recommend? I attempted to hide the eagerness in my voice. You mean, what would Stuart recommend? Shit, yes. Wait, maybe. Whatever. Go on. I suppose people sometimes use poetry to describe what they're feeling. But poems are still words, aren't they? Yes, words. The skill comes with knowing how to put those words together, which I seem to be failing at. And there's music and art. Not really Ted's thing. Well, he looked downwards, and he took my hands into his. Physical affection is another way to do it. I love that idea. The words tumbled out of my mouth. He chuckled at my enthusiasm. And what would Ted think? Fuck Ted. I squeezed his hands. Let's give this a try. We can do that. And if you feel uncomfortable at all, you'll let me know the moment it happens. Yes, I told him. I trust you. That's the moment I learned that. And he did not disappoint. First he brought my hands to his lips. He closed his eyes and pressed a tender kiss onto the back of each one. Then he turned them over and he kissed both wrists with equal tenderness. Oh, I audibly shivered. That was fucking magical. It was, wasn't it? He appeared to be as astonished as I was. Do it again, I said. Which part? I turned my hands, palms facing down. All of it. Happily. He closed his eyes and repeated the manoeuvre, back of the hand, wrists, then he did it again without me having to ask. After the fourth or fifth time, each of which was more magical, he dropped one of his hands to my waist and set it there, right above my hip. A whoosh of air came from my lungs, the way it felt when he touched me in the multiple places at once. It felt like happiness had punched me in the chest. You're okay? He asked. Yeah, I really am, I assured him. And look, if I'm gonna trust you to make me feel comfortable, you'll need to trust me to tell you if I'm not. Deal. With that he gingerly put his other hand on my hip, and he pulled my body into his. Yes, I said, yes to that. He looked up at me, meeting my gaze. He was so close that all I could concentrate on was his lips and what they might taste like. Go on, I instructed. I didn't know what he was thinking of doing next, but I knew whatever it was, I was okay with it. All right, he smiled. Just wanted to look at you for a moment. And then he leaned forward, pressing our foreheads together. It was all unexpected and deeply romantic. I sighed happily. Yeah, that's a little terrifying, to be honest, but really wonderful. You're not joking, he agreed. My heart is beating so quickly. It's as if I've just run the length of the ship and back 10 times. I laughed. Are you nervous? Very, he replied. That's surprising. You make this seem easy. It's not. Not normally. But with you it feels easy. Something happened to my heart then, like all the air got squeezed out. It wasn't at all unpleasant. We stood there silently for a few moments, forehead to forehead. I could feel his body heat, his breath mixing with mine. His fingers trickled up and down my spine and lower back as we held one another, swaying back and forth. Not really sure if it was our own movements or if it was the ocean rocking us. Maybe a little of both. And when I finally got the courage, I lifted one of my hands to the side of his face and set the other one just above his temple. He leaned into my touch, sighing happily. It was time to take what I wanted. I combed my fingers through his hair. It was very soft, softer than cashmere, maybe. You're quite a fast learner, he said. Perhaps you could show me a few things yourself. I've got no clue what I'm doing, not even a little bit. But he knew I wasn't an idiot. He probably knew I was no stranger to romantic encounters, but not with someone I loved. He probably didn't know that. Don't think too much, he said, his eyes falling closed again. These type of things, it's best to just do what feels natural. I looked back at him. Jesus, he just looked so kissable. That's when I finally had a plan. I wanted to kiss him more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. But I also wasn't ready to let go of this moment with him. Everything about it was just so perfect. So I mapped out in my mind every place that I would put my lips on him. I laid both hands on the sides of his face and pressed a kiss into his forehead, and the way his cheeks moved. I knew he was smiling. I lingered there for a few seconds, inhaling the salty, smoky scent of his hair. Then I moved my lips to his closed eyelids, a very soft kiss on each one. To his cheeks, first the left and then the right. I slid my hands upwards, weaving my fingertips through his hair, and I gently tugged, tilting his head to the side to kiss his jaw. This caused him to emit a tiny, unvoiced moan. I knew it was my signal to continue. I trailed my lips down the side of his neck, kissing every inch of it. Then I tilted his head to the other side and did the same. Christ, you're good at this, he murmured, pulling our bodies closer together. I leaned back so I could look him in the eye. With you, it feels easy. He smiled at me, the way he always does. But this time was a bit different. I could tell he wanted to kiss me just as badly as I wanted to kiss him. So I leaned forward and put my lips on his. Everything seemed to disappear then. Memories of my past and the things that I'd done. Any pain that I'd ever felt. All the things that I regretted, it all just fell away. On the night I knew I loved him, I actually just learned that I always knew. But how could I have known that love could be so silent that it felt as though I had been barely breathed into existence? How could I know that I'd always felt it, even before I met him? My world was always a cannon waiting to strike. Gunpowder and whips and daggers, a firework waiting to burst. And he showed up, sweeter and prettier than a lullaby, drowning out all the noise around me. He released another happy sigh and pulled me in closer, deepening the kiss, and I held on to him with no intention of letting go. We would talk about all of this later, because here, on this ship, he and I had nothing but time. Time and each other. And when we kissed, we were the only two things in the universe.